I tried Who Am I question for a week and my mind went crazy. Sound familiar? Today we are tackling one of the most misunderstood spiritual practices through 3 questions about self-inquiry. First question: I tried Who Am I for a week and my mind went crazy. Is that normal? Let's break this down with clarity. You sit to practice self-inquiry and you ask, Who am I? Expecting calm, insight, maybe a little peace. You want clarity. You want the mind to quiet down. Instead, the opposite happens. Thoughts multiply, emotions flare up, and the mind feels more restless than before. This reaction is actually a sign of progress. When you question the mind's assumptions, the mind defends itself. The noise you are noticing is not new. It was always there. Now you are just becoming aware of it. Self-inquiry is not meant to silence the mind instantly. It exposes the underlying momentum of thought, and the mind reacts because its identity feels threatened by this inquiry. So, yes, it's normal. You are not failing. You have simply begun to see the mind clearly. And clarity is the beginning of freedom. This naturally brings us to understanding the practice itself. Now let's look at the second question. What exactly is Atma Vichara as taught by Ramana Maharshi? Many people think Atma Vichara is repeating the question, Who am I? Like a mantra. They want a step-by-step method to realize the self. But the practice is often misunderstood. It is not about finding a new identity, new belief, or new answer. Sri Ramana taught that Atma Vichara is essentially a redirecting of attention. When a thought appears, trace it back. To whom? The answer is always to me. Then turn attention to that me itself. Not to find an answer, but to dissolve the questioner. When this redirection of attention becomes natural, the mind gradually loses its habit of outward projection. The aim of self-inquiry is to follow the sense of I back to its root. It's not about one I trying to find another I. It's about letting the mind settle back into its own source. Even though this sense of I is always present, our attention is usually pulled outward. When attention gently turns back towards this feeling of I, understanding unfolds on its own. As the separate I fades, what remains is a quiet, self-luminous presence, not as an idea, but as being itself. That is Atma Vichara, simple, direct, and entirely experiential. Let's discuss third question. Why is self-observation important? Self-observation matters because it exposes the mind's constant background noise, subtle unease, tension, judgment, and the habit of escaping the present moment. Most people never notice this because they are unconsciously identified with their thoughts. For instance, notice what happens when you are stuck in traffic or waiting in a slow-moving queue. There is an immediate mental commentary. This is taking too long, or why is this person so slow? And almost instantly, you can feel it in the body. Maybe a tightness in the shoulders. Or notice what happens when someone interrupts you mid-sentence. How quickly irritation shows up. How the mind spins a story about disrespect. These aren't isolated moments. This is the mind's constant mechanical pattern at work. When you begin to watch the mind, two things become clear. The mind resists staying in the present. It keeps projecting, analyzing, hunting, and seeking. This activity isn't you. It's a mechanical pattern you have assumed to be yourself. As you observe, you may be surprised to notice how much unease exists even in normal situations. At the level of thought, there is judgment, discontent, and constant mental movement away from the now. At the level of emotion, there is tension, boredom, or nervousness. When you are identified with the mind, you can hardly stop thinking for a few minutes. You become its servant without realizing it and mistake this restless mental activity for your identity. Freedom begins when you recognize that you are not the thinker. This insight allows you to observe the thinking process instead of being controlled by it. The moment you notice that you are aware of a thought, that thought starts to lose its grip. A small gap opens up between I am and whatever the mind is saying. In that gap, there is clarity and stillness. And with practice, those gaps naturally deepen. Self-observation is not about fighting thoughts. It's about seeing them as something you can watch. When you stand as the witness, compulsive thinking weakens, the sense of a doer loosens, and the mind turns from a tyrant into a tool. This is the beginning of inner freedom and ground on which true inquiry can happen. If you are exploring Vedanta or Ramana Maharshi's teachings, remember, self-inquiry is not an exercise in thinking. The very purpose of self-inquiry is to focus the entire mind at its source. Which of these challenges your practice the most? Mental noise, misunderstanding the method, or breaking identification with thoughts? Drop a comment below and let's explore it together. And if you want to understand the real purpose of Vedantic meditation, watch this video next.